It was 1978. NATO war planners had a problem they couldn't solve. The Soviet Union had amassed over 50,000 tanks on the Central European frontier, and the math was brutal. For every NATO tank, there were 3 Soviet ones ready to roll through the Fulda Gap. The Pentagon had one answer left: tactical nuclear weapons. But someone in DARPA had a different idea. What if you could kill an entire tank column? Not with a nuke, not with a pilot, but with a radar signal and a missile that thought for itself. They called it Assault Breaker.
During peacetime. Not just the simple task of occupation, but the enactment of a more complex role in the defense of the Western world, the job of nailing down the peace. Our cameras swing to focus close up on those who stand alert, guardians of our perimeter of peace, soldier in your...
And for 4 years, they told Congress it was working. It wasn't.
To understand why Assault Breaker existed, you have to understand what NATO was actually looking at in the late 1970s. The Central Front, the stretch of terrain running from northern Germany down through the Fulda Gap into Bavaria, was the most heavily militarized piece of land on the planet. On one side, American and West German divisions. On the other, the full weight of the Soviet second echelon. Warsaw Pact planners weren't thinking about a single push. They were thinking about waves. The first echelon breaks through. The second echelon exploits the gap. By the time NATO could respond, the front would already be 200 kilometers inside West Germany. The conventional math didn't work. NATO's own war games kept arriving at the same conclusion. Hold for 72 hours, then escalate to tactical nuclear weapons. That was the plan. That was the actual plan. A nuclear exchange over German soil because nobody could figure out how to stop 50,000 tanks any other way.
In 1977, the Carter administration handed DARPA a specific problem. Find a third option. Not nuclear, not a conventional force buildup that would take decades and cost hundreds of billions. Something asymmetric. Something that could neutralize a Soviet tank army before it ever reached the front line. The concept DARPA landed on was elegant in theory. An airborne radar platform would loiter behind friendly lines, scanning hundreds of kilometers of terrain. It would detect moving tank columns using a technology called Ground Moving Target Indicator, GMTI. It would then transmit targeting coordinates to a ground-based missile battery. The missiles would fire. The submunitions would deploy over the tank column, and the tanks would die. Automatically, without a human in the targeting loop. They called the program Assault Breaker, and the key word, the one that mattered most, was automatically. Because that word was the entire premise, and it was the first thing they quietly abandoned. The sensor at the heart of Assault Breaker was called Pave Mover, an experimental airborne radar suite built to do something that had never been done at operational scale: distinguish a moving tank from everything else on a cluttered European battlefield in real time, from tens of thousands of feet in the air. The physics of this problem are worth understanding. Radar works by sending out a signal and measuring what comes back. The challenge is that everything reflects radar: trees, buildings, trucks, rain, birds. The Soviet Union knew this. Their entire doctrine assumed that any sufficiently cluttered battlefield would blind American sensors. Pave Mover's answer was Doppler shift processing. Every moving object changes the frequency of the radar signal it reflects. The faster it moves, the bigger the shift. A tank column moving at 30 kilometers per hour produces a specific Doppler signature. Pave Mover used phase-coherent signal processing and bandpass filters to isolate exactly that signature, canceling out returns that didn't match the movement profile of armored vehicles. In theory, you could sit in an aircraft 50 miles behind friendly lines and watch an entire Soviet tank army moving in real time. In theory.
But detecting tanks was only half the problem. The other half was what you did with that information. In 1978, there were no GPS satellites, no fiber optic data networks, no cloud-based targeting systems. The question DARPA was trying to answer was this: how do you take a targeting coordinate generated by a moving aircraft and transmit it in real time to a missile already in flight with enough precision to guide it to a specific vehicle in a specific column on a specific piece of terrain?
It's the first opportunity that the Alliance exercise the counter A2, AD scenario, the area access, area denial, and also the IMD concept, the integrated air and missile defense scenario.
The answer was the Weapon Guidance Data Link. The Pave Mover radar would perform onboard processing to extract target coordinates. Those coordinates would be transmitted via a secure, high-bandwidth link to the weapon control system on the ground. The ground system would update the missile's guidance package mid-flight. The missile would then release terminally guided submunitions, small, self-guided warheads with infrared seekers that would home in on the heat signatures of individual tank engines. The kill chain was supposed to be seamless, sensor to shooter, aircraft to missile to submunition to tank. Automated, precise, revolutionary. On paper, it was the most sophisticated targeting architecture ever conceived. In practice, every single link in that chain had a problem.
Between 1978 and 1982, DARPA conducted 14 test flights of the Assault Breaker system using two modified missiles, the T-16, based on the Patriot airframe, and the T-22, based on the Lance. The results were not what the program office was telling Congress. Very few of those 14 flights proceeded without problems. And here's the detail that doesn't appear in any of the official program summaries. The system was never tested against fully combat-realistic targets. No multiple moving tank columns. No electronic countermeasures. No bad weather. No smoke. No battlefield clutter of the kind that would exist the moment the first shell landed on a real European battlefield. The Army Science Board reviewed the submunition seeker technology and delivered a verdict that should have ended the program. The infrared sensors, they found, had adequate sensitivity only in uniform backgrounds. The moment you introduced rain, the kind of persistent low cloud and drizzle that defines Central European weather for 6 months of the year, the seekers lost their targets. Fog degraded them further. Smoke from burning vehicles, the exact conditions of the battlefield they were designed for, rendered them effectively useless. And there was something else. Something the Soviets could have figured out with a single intelligence report. If you cooled a tank's engine, if you simply switched it off and let it sit for 20 minutes, the infrared signature dropped enough to defeat the seeker entirely. The Army Science Board's conclusion was unambiguous. A major seeker redesign would be required before the system could be considered operationally viable. That redesign never happened. Beat. While the engineers were dealing with the technical failures, a separate battle was being fought in the corridors of the Pentagon. Assault Breaker was supposed to be a joint program, Army and Air Force working together on a single integrated system. The reality was that neither service actually wanted to integrate with the other. The Air Force had its own radar development program. The Army had its own missile and submunition programs. Both services saw Assault Breaker as a threat to their individual procurement budgets. If a joint system worked, it would undermine the case for their separate programs. So they dragged their feet.
They withheld cooperation. They slow-walked the integration work. The situation became so bad that DARPA and the Office of the Secretary of Defense took an extraordinary step. They bypassed the standard service acquisition channels entirely. DARPA reported directly to the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering and established a unique steering group that forced the services to participate. Think about what that means. The most advanced weapons integration program in the American arsenal had to be managed by the civilian leadership of the Pentagon because the Army and the Air Force refused to work together. That inter-service friction didn't just slow the program down, it shaped every technical compromise that followed.
In late 1982, the Assault Breaker program was officially halted. The public reason was cost and limited success. Both were true, but the more significant decision, the one that revealed exactly what the Pentagon thought of the program's actual achievements, happened quietly, without announcement, in the transition planning documents. When the Pave Mover radar was handed off to the Air Force to evolve into what would eventually become the E-8C Joint Stars, a specific decision was made. The Weapon Guidance Data Link, the component that made Assault Breaker theoretically revolutionary, the automated connection between the radar and the missile, the sensor-to-shooter loop that was the entire premise of the program, was dropped, removed, stripped out of the system before it ever reached operational status. The Air Force didn't want it. The Army didn't want to fund it. And without that link, JSTARS was no longer an automated kill system. It was a surveillance platform. A very good surveillance platform, but a surveillance platform that still required human operators to take the radar data, interpret it, communicate it through conventional channels, and direct fire through existing command structures. The latency problem that Assault Breaker was designed to solve, the time gap between detecting a tank and killing it, remained completely unsolved. Here is where the story gets interesting. Because Assault Breaker didn't disappear. It transformed. The program was broken apart into its component pieces. The ground attack missile role went to the Army's ATACMS program. The radar became JSTARS. The submunition technology informed the Blue 108 and the brilliant anti-armor technology, the BAT. Each of those programs was eventually fielded. Each of them worked within their individual limitations. And so the narrative that emerged, the one that appears in defense policy documents, think tank analyses, and congressional testimony to this day, is that Assault Breaker was a success. That it proved the concept of the sensor-to-shooter kill chain, that it validated the second offset strategy, and set the template for American military dominance for the next 4 decades. What that narrative carefully omits is that the thing that made Assault Breaker revolutionary, the automated integration of all those components into a single seamless kill chain, was never actually achieved. The spin-offs worked, the system never did. The Pentagon took a failed integration experiment, harvested its parts, declared victory, and wrote it into the official history of American military innovation.
In February 2026, the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance published a transcript titled Making Clouds Rain for Missile Defense. In it, Pentagon analysts explicitly described Assault Breaker as the architectural grandfather of the Joint Fires Network, the system currently being developed to link sensors and shooters across every domain of modern warfare: land, sea, air, space, cyber. The JFN is the most ambitious command and control architecture the Pentagon has attempted since the Cold War. It is also, structurally, the same problem Assault Breaker was trying to solve in 1978. How do you close the loop between a sensor and a shooter fast enough that the target doesn't move before the weapon arrives? In Ukraine, Russian forces learned to move within the radar detection window to exploit the latency between being seen and being hit.
American drone programs under the Replicator initiative are trying to compress that window to near zero using autonomous targeting logic. The same autonomous targeting logic that Assault Breaker's engineers were trying to build in 1978 with 1970s hardware and couldn't.
There is a specific way that institutions deal with failure. They don't erase it, they reframe it. They find the parts that worked, name them after the thing that didn't, and declare the experiment a success. Assault Breaker failed as a system. Its sensors were defeated by weather. Its data link was abandoned. Its tests were never realistic. And yet, it sits at the foundation of the American theory of warfare, the idea that technology can compress the kill chain fast enough to offset numerical disadvantage. That idea has never actually been proven end-to-end. Not in 1982. Not in the Gulf War, where JSTARS worked, but the automated guidance link it was stripped of never existed. Not in Iraq or Afghanistan, where the enemy simply refused to move in tank columns. And not today, where the Pentagon is spending billions to rebuild the exact architecture that DARPA canceled 40 years ago because it didn't work. The question worth asking, the one that the defense establishment conspicuously avoids, is not whether the Joint Fires Network will be more sophisticated than Assault Breaker. It almost certainly will be. The question is whether we have actually solved the problems that killed Assault Breaker. The seeker vulnerability, the latency, the inter-service integration failure, or whether we have simply built better components for a system whose core logic was never validated. Because if the foundation was never proven, then everything built on top of it is not a revolution. It's a very expensive assumption.
The world changing as fast as it is. Technology is changing with advanced manufacturing, AI, autonomy. All of these things is changing the way that wars are fought already and will extend into the future. The way that we purchase and test weapon systems also needs to change with that.
So nothing's really beyond the realm of yes, unless you just...
Game of Drones was a unique challenge. We had a whole bunch of diverse and mostly unproven technologies that we were trying to integrate that are designed for different mission sets.
You can't do good UAS testing without counter UAS testing. These two things are integrated here together. We're going to see quite a few different things today. Some drones are going to be moving about 200 miles an hour. There are only a few great locations for flying drones, but I don't know that any one of them is as good as Edwards Air Force Base. The history of aerospace innovation is here.